Hi everyone, and happy Easter. This is Deacon Ed McCormick at St. John the Baptist Catholic Community. And today I want to talk to you about Easter. I want to talk to you about the meaning of Jesus' resurrection. This is a vast topic, but I want to say a couple of things to help you out, to help you understand the significance of Jesus' resurrection. You know, when Jesus died after his crucifixion and began to appear to his disciples, uniformly, the disciples and the early church claimed that God had raised him from the dead. They could have used other words to express what happened to Jesus after his death, but they've chose the word resurrection. Now, this is a Jewish word. It's not found in many parts of the Old Testament. It's found in Isaiah 25 and 26. It's referenced in Ezekiel 37, in Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, and then 2 Maccabees chapter 7. So it's a late concept in the Old Testament, but it emerges out of this conviction that God is the creator of all things, and that the one who has created the world out of chaos can raise up the people of Israel, can raise up the dead. And so even though there are only a few references to resurrection in the Old Testament, it actually functions as a catch-all term. To say that God has raised Jesus from the dead is to claim that God has launched God's promised new age or future age or new creation. And so I want to give you a little bit of background to understand what we mean when we say Jesus has been raised from the dead. It certainly says something about him and his status, but it also says something about what God is doing through him for the entire cosmos, for all of humanity, and for each of us. So it does mean, first of all, that Jesus is now alive. This is not a resuscitation. This is not like what happened to Lazarus, because Lazarus was going to die again and did die again. Resurrection refers to the transformed bodily existence of Jesus. It means he is alive, he is conscious and existing in a new transformed bodily state. And it's through the Holy Spirit that he, who was among all the dead, he among all the dead is the only one who now has gone through death and come out the other side. So resurrection, first of all, does mean that God has done something absolutely unique for Jesus. That unlike any other dead person, Jesus is now not dead. He's alive. He's living a transformed existence with God. But I want to then step back and show you how when we claim Jesus has been raised from the dead, we're not just saying something that God did for him. We're claiming that God is doing something for the cosmos and for all of us through Jesus. So here's the background. If you read particularly the prophet Isaiah, but also Jeremiah and Ezekiel, you start to notice that Isaiah is constantly making these promises. He's constantly saying one day in the future it will happen. It's all future tense. And he is a prophet who's making these promises to the people of Israel about what God is going to do for them. And these promises come under two buckets. The first one is the Exodus story. So like a good Jew, Isaiah thinks of and remembers that at the Exodus, God freed enslaved Israel from the Egyptians, gave them a covenant, made them a special people, and engaged in this relationship, this covenant relationship with the people of Israel. Well, throughout Isaiah, he keeps promising to Israel that there'll be a new Exodus, there'll be a new covenant. And the reason this is important is that for much of the time that Isaiah and his disciples lived, Israel's capital had been destroyed by the Babylonians. and all the people except for the poor were deported. And so they're all of Israel's living in Babylon, praying and hoping that one day God will free them from Babylonian captivity and bring them back to their homeland. And Isaiah promises that God will do this. God will end exile. There'll be a new exodus, and just as God led the Israelites out of Egypt, God will lead the Israelites back home to Jerusalem, and God will restore God's people. There'll be a new covenant. God will take their stony hearts out and give them new hearts, pour God's Spirit upon them, and there'll be a new covenant relationship between God and the people. And Isaiah has all these magnificent images of this. One is of God leading the people across the desert from exile back to the Holy Land. And as they're going through the desert, all of a sudden the desert turns into springs and trees, and there's food, and people who have bad knees get good knees, and the deaf can hear, the mute can speak. Another image is from Isaiah 25, where everybody, Jews and Gentiles, will stream to Jerusalem, and there will be peace and justice and these great banquets, and God will dwell in Jerusalem as King of the world. The second dominant bucket in which Isaiah makes promises has to do with creation. The God who created the world, the God who pulled all of creation out of chaos, will pull Israel out of the chaos of the exile and create them anew. And in fact, in Isaiah 65, he talks about creating a new heaven and new earth. And in all of these promises, when God enacts them, and the first century Jewish belief is that the present age is terrible. There's suffering, there's death, there's sickness, there's Roman taxes and Roman laws. This is not how God intended the world to be. But one day, as Isaiah promised, there'll be a new exodus, a new creation, and God, rather than Caesar, will rule the world as king through his Davidic king. So along comes Jesus, and he's claiming that what the prophet's promise has begun to happen through him. And after his execution, it looks like none of those promises came true. And so when Jesus appears to his disciples, the early church realizes that all of those promises, the promises of new creation, the promises of the new exodus, the restoration of God's people, the outpouring of the Spirit, will all begin to happen in and through Jesus. So when we claim that Jesus is raised from the dead, we are certainly claiming that he is now alive. He's greater than death. He is in heaven with the Father. But we're also claiming that he is sending from heaven, from God's future world, all the life of heaven, the life of God, into our present world. He is relating that future world to the present. He's launching the new exodus and the new creation. And that's what resurrection means. Now in the New Testament, we have all these stories of Jesus appearing to his disciples, and we get hints of how his appearance, his presence with his disciples is beginning to launch this. I'll just give you one example to close. In John chapter 20, the disciples are gathered in the upper room. They're terrified. They think soon the Romans are coming for them and they're going to be killed just like Jesus. This is what the present age does. It terrifies people. It threatens them with death and political and religious violence. And into the midst of this group that's terrified, he appears and says to them, "Shalom, peace be with you." Twice he says shalom. He breathes on them, receive the Holy Spirit. And they're transformed. Their fear is replaced with joy. They now breathe in that Holy Spirit that Ezekiel promised. They get new hearts and new minds. And when he says, "Peace be with you," he's announcing that the promised age of peace that Isaiah spoke about has begun, and his relationship with his disciples is renewed. And when he breathes on them, just as Yahweh breathed on Adam, Jesus is breathing on us to create the world anew. So my friends, we who believe he has been raised from the dead believe a power greater than death is pouring into our world and our lives. We believe that the promises of the prophets has begun to come true, and we are being made into a new creation. We are being freed from all the enslaving forces to be his disciples. This is why Easter is a joy. And as his disciples, this is what we are to witness to. Have a good day.